The Newton Gang were outlaws who operated in the early 20th century and committed dozens of bank robberies between 1919 and 1924. Willis Newton claimed that he and his brothers took in more money than Butch Cassidy's Wild Bunch, the Dalton Gang, and the James Younger Gang combined. Despite having committed many robberies, they received very little attention from the police. But on June 12, 1924, that would change when robbing Milwaukee Road's fast mail train. Welcome back to the Past Crimes channel. Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe for more videos. Uvalde County, Texas was the birthplace of the Newton brothers. On the recently settled Great Plains, the four sons of a large cotton farming family worked as sharecroppers. Willis Newton, the leader and mastermind, started his career at a young age and was raised on outlaw tales by their mother. As a newsboy at the time, he followed the contemporary exploits of outlaw Harry Tracy in the purple press. The brothers' pride didn't seem to fit with sharecropping, and Willis Newton claimed that at the age of 20, he was wrongfully imprisoned for a crime that his brother Doc Newton had committed, stealing loose cotton from one processing gin's loading dock and attempting to sell it at another. Local police were unable to locate Doc, so they instead arrested and charged Willis. Willis was reportedly sentenced to a year in the harsh Texas state prison system, where he was made to continue picking cotton after a local jury found him guilty based on tenuous evidence. In the face of the inhumane circumstances and his perception of the overall injustice, his attitude quickly became more jaded. Doc soon entered the criminal justice system, probably for straightforward theft of less than $50. Due to their numerous attempts to escape, the two brothers were in and out of the Texas penal system from 1909 until 1918 or 1920, which resulted in additional sentences and a hardening of their attitudes. After being eventually released, Willis started a career in small-time theft, frequently stealing clothing at night from convenience stores. Brothers Jess and Joe stayed out of the penal system until later, working regularly as bronc busters and ranch hands. Willis started a more serious criminal career in 1914. In Klein, Texas, 18 miles west of Uvalde in southwestern Uvalde County, he and a companion robbed a Southern Pacific Railroad passenger train, demanding $4,700 from passengers. In 1916, Willis and a gang he joined in Durant, Oklahoma, robbed a bank in Boswell, Oklahoma, taking just over $10,000 before fleeing on horseback. He was sent back to jail for burglary in 1917, but he eventually used forged letters to get a pardon. After being released, Willis worked as a sort of apprentice for a group of bank robbers, though the lineup frequently changed due to deaths and reckless behavior. Willis made the decision to create his own crew out of pride and intelligence. It appears that working with a seasoned safecracker was a turning point. Willis and Brentwood Glasscock, a safecracker and expert in high explosives, founded what people later came to refer to as the Newton Boys in 1920 while operating out of Tulsa, Oklahoma. Willis persuaded his cowboy brothers Joe and later Jess to join his group. After making a successful escape from a Texas prison in 1920, Doc was able to quickly join his brothers. With this group as the crew's core, they had success robbing banks in Texas, Arkansas, Oklahoma, Kansas, Nebraska, Iowa, Colorado, North Dakota, Missouri, Illinois, Wisconsin, and Canada. Most of their heists took place at night, when they could enter the bank safe without ever having to interact with anyone or the authorities. Willis obtained a list of banks that still had older models of safes that were vulnerable to their brand of attack by paying off a corrupt insurance official with the Texas Association of Bankers. This attack involved forcing nitroglycerin into the cracks in the square door and detonating the explosive with dynamite caps. The explosions that followed were messy and loud, but the gang preferred to operate in the dead of winter in small farm towns where two men could keep the few residents at bay while the money was hustled out to waiting cars. On rare occasions, the team would alter their strategies and prepare daytime robberies, such as the straightforward bank robbery that took place in New Braunfels, Texas, on March 9, 1922, or the audacious and overly ambitious multiple attack on bank messengers in Toronto, Ontario, Canada, on July 24, 1923, when the Toronto Currency Clearinghouse was targeted during morning rush hour. The Newtons' reluctance to actually shoot people collided with the bank messengers' refusal to hand over their bags. 2 messengers were wounded by Willis during the struggle and subsequent escape as shots were eventually exchanged. The gang made about 84,000 Canadian dollars from 2 bags, but their reputation for nonviolence was damaged. Most bank jobs yielded small profits, frequently less than $10,000 in cash and negotiable bonds. The majority of the loot was frequently made up of Liberty and Victory bonds that were taken from individual safe deposit boxes. Through connections in the criminal underworld in Chicago, where Willis and Glasscock developed relationships, various bonds and other securities were fenced. Willis insisted on carrying out even the coins from the banks, remaining methodical to the end. "We are never satisfied. I want to get everything. When I go in to get anything," he enjoyed boasting. Willis was ambitious and put a lot of his money into oil wells in Smackover, Arkansas, and Mineral Wells, Texas, hoping to strike it rich during the times when millionaires could be made in an instant. In order to avoid suspicion, Doc and Jess lived the high life, attending the Kentucky Derby and Indianapolis 500 on multiple occasions, as well as enjoying the nightlife in cities like Chicago, Kansas City, and others in between jobs. They also ate at the best restaurants and stayed in the fanciest hotels. Willis convinced Joe to join him in a number of unsuccessful oil well investments. Despite having committed a significant number of robberies, the Newton gang received very little attention from the police. That would all change on June 12, 1924, when they robbed Milwaukee Road's Fast Mail, a postal train. In collaboration with 4 other associates and a dishonest postal inspector named William Fahey, the gang used inside knowledge to rob a Chicago-bound postal train that was traveling north and west and carrying sizable amounts of money that the Federal Reserve had ordered for banks along the route. Willis and Jess sneaked onto the train in Chicago, got into the engine, and stopped it at a remote railroad crossing in Rondout, Illinois. They made more than $3 million in one take from the robbery and was the largest train robbery in history. However, during the robbery, the engineer had to back the train up after overshooting the crossing out of nervousness, which forced some of the robbers to move out of position. Wily Doc Newton was shot 5 times by Brent Glasscock during the confusion because he mistook him for an armed postal worker in the dark. The gang took the cash, put Doc in a car, and drove away. A witness claimed to have overheard one of the robbers say the name Willie as they were getting into the car. This testimony was later used at trial. After police received a tip about an underworld doctor's visit to treat the injured man, Doc and Joe were the first people to be detained in a Chicago tenement. Willis was detained when he returned to the room the following day, but he came very close to getting away with it by offering the arresting officers $20,000 in cash. The officers wanted to accept it, but a supervisor deceived them after the money had been exchanged. Glasscock concealed the majority of the money after Joe, Willis, and Doc Newton were apprehended, and Jess Newton escaped and fled to Texas with $35,000 in his possession. When everyone involved in the robbery were eventually apprehended, it was reported in the media that all but $100,000 had been recovered. Given the possibility of harsh punishment, the gang members consented to testify against Fahey and the racketeers. The prosecution portrayed the case as a victory for the law by making an example of the dishonest postal inspector and his connections to the mob. Due to the fact that only one of their own gang members was hurt, and the majority of the money was returned, the gang received relatively light sentences after entering a guilty plea and providing crucial evidence which helped in convicting others. because Jess was brought to Chicago wearing rodeo attire after being tricked into entering Texas from Mexico as part of a barroom wager involving a bronc ride at an Independence Day rodeo. Chicago newspapers painted the Newton boys as colorful cowboys. The arresting officer was Texas Ranger Harrison Hamer, a brother of the man responsible for taking down Bonnie and Clyde, Frank Hamer. The $100,000 that was acknowledged as missing was never found. Some of it had been interred by Jess Newton northwest of San Antonio, but he could never recall where exactly because he had been intoxicated. Due to their clean criminal records, Jess and Joe received the lightest sentences, and they later returned to Uvalde, Texas, where they largely led respectable lives. Willis and Doc spent years in Leavenworth. Joe and Willis Newton allowed the Barrow Gang to hide out in a house they owned in Tulsa following the April 6, 1934, murder of Constable Cal Campbell by Clyde Barrow and Henry Methvin in Commerce, Oklahoma. On April 10, 1934, the infamous letter purporting to be from Clyde Barrow and addressed to Henry Ford was sent from Tulsa. It may have been written at the Newton residence. Bonnie and Clyde didn't particularly impress Willis Newton. They were silly kids, he said, who only killed people randomly and robbed gas stations.